Oh, thank you. Thank you. Sorry for the delay in starting. We're just waiting for the Health Minister to arrive, but I will cover off on some housekeeping before we get going. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Karen Percival, the CEO of MND South Australia. We're absolutely delighted to be hosting the conference in South Australia this year. So, amazing attendance. Thank you all for coming, and I'm sure you're in for a very informative day, and we hope that you really take home some tips and information about how better to care for people with motor neurone disease. Just some housekeeping for the day. A reminder about the venue rules. So could I ask you all please to turn your mobile phones to silent? We will happily come and collect donations from anyone's phone. Anyone's phone goes off, we'll come around and get a donation. Wi-Fi is available, so if you look in the front page of the programme, there's the instructions on how you can access Wi-Fi. And we also have the social media tag, hashtag MNDConf18. So if you do any tweeting or any social media posts today, if you could do that, that would be absolutely fantastic. There's obviously water and refreshments on your table. The break times are on your programme, inside the programme. We do have a photographer today taking photographs, so if you have any issue with that, please let him know when he comes around. And we're also recording the sessions today, so we will make those available as soon as they're finished. So the sessions are being recorded with the speaker and the notes from each speaker, so we will make those available after the conference. If anybody wishes to smoke, the area behind the registrations desk, there is a balcony. You can go out on the balcony. And the restrooms are just out of the room and to the left. And there's disabled toilets there as well if anybody needs those. And when we have question times after any of the sessions today, we will have roving microphones around the room. So if you could just wait for those to come to you so everybody can benefit from hearing the questions. So in the unlikely event of an emergency, an alert tone will sound. Please follow the instructions provided by this tone or hotel staff. In the event of an evacuation, please make your way out to the pre-function area out the back and exit the hotel down the fire stairs or lobby stairs. These are located at either end of the pre-function area. Please gather at Clubhouse Lane, located to the left-hand side of the hotel, until further instructions. So we hope you have a really informative day. Thank you all for coming. And I'd like to introduce David Ali, the President of MND Australia.
Thank you, Kerry, for that welcome. On behalf of MND Australia, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the 9th National Motor Neurone Disease Conference. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting on today. I hope I pronounce this right because the reception couldn't tell me how to pronounce it. The Kuranda people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge I think it's the Kaurna people as their custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. We also pay respects to the cultural authority of Aboriginal people attending from other areas of Australia. While I'm recognising and acknowledging people, I must thank MND South Australia for hosting this year's conference. I can appreciate it's been an absolutely enormous effort for them to get to this point, but the truth, of course, will be in what you learn and share today. But I can certainly say it must be very, very hard and very challenging to put on such a great event as today, and it involves not only the work of South Australia, but also a very collaborative effort by a hard-working conference organising committee, which has representatives from MND Australia, MND Victoria, MND WA, MND New South Wales, and of course our hosts, MND South Australia. You would have to agree that the conference organising committee has put an awesome program together. And so today you'll hear from several colleagues, including keynote speakers such as Susan Mathers of the Calvary Health Care Bethlehem, Professor Seema Aoun of La Trobe University, who's also Vice President of MND WA, so she actually works on both sides of the country, and so she's come to South Australia right in the middle. and Dr. Shu No of the University of Queensland. There's a menu of topics that will be discussed today after we hear from two personal perspectives, and all of this is neatly presented under the conference theme of informing, influencing and innovating. These topics include patient-centred care, adapting to rapidly changing function, quality of life care, patient needs, a multidisciplinary team approach and a regional approach. We'll hear about a multidisciplinary management of people with MND under the NDIS, and also an integrated approach to supporting NDIS participants. Influencing involuntary assisted dying, the impact of assisted technology on quality of life, news regarding a trial of the suprascapular nerve block for shoulder pain in MND, and of course new initiatives and insights for research. So I'm sure today will be a really stimulating day. There'll be lots of learning, lots of sharing, and also on behalf of MND Australia, I thank you all again for being here. Some of you have travelled some very long distances, and I understand that some people have come across the ditch from New Zealand. So welcome not only to Adelaide, Australia, and this conference. So by working together, sharing information and knowledge, we can all help people affected by MND, not only those who are diagnosed, but their carers, their families, health professionals, friends and colleagues, so that we can all ensure that they live well and maintain the fight against MND. In this regard, I particularly want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the support service and other staff from the state MND associations. And on behalf of MND Australia, I thank you and them for your contribution, your commitment, your dedication and your support for people living with MND, because it's without people like you, people living with MND will not be having the quality of support and care that they desperately need. On behalf of MND Australia, I'd also like to particularly acknowledge and thank Cytokinetics for their generous support as the conference sponsor, and also the trade displays. I'm not sure where the trade displays are, but they're somewhere out there, good. And so they include organisations like Link Assistive, OPC Health, Philips Sleep Easy, Public Trustees, SA Care and Zytec. And of course I'd like to thank the Grand Chancellor Hotel. So thank you. So I'll move on to introducing the Minister, the Honourable Stephen Wade, who I didn't get the chance to meet the Minister, but I'm going to call him Stephen, if that's all right. Good, thank you. So Stephen was appointed South Australia's Minister for Health and Wellbeing in March this year, and he's been a member of the Legislative Council in the South Australian Parliament for the last 12 years. He's a graduate in law and economics from the University of Adelaide, although I did notice he's actually born in Victoria, so that's great, but he obviously came over here as a young'un. He's worked in politics, corporate governance and on a range of boards, and he's also a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Despite his busy life, I'm sure Stephen still finds time to pursue his passion of bushwalking in the Adelaide Hills, where I understand that's where he lives. So I note from one of his bios I read on Google, so I Googled him and found all these bios. That's how I know about his bushwalking with his wife. And so it's amazing what you can find at Google, of course. But that he's had a very long connection with people living with disabilities, as well as he's had very long interest and passion around health and wellbeing. From 2003 to 2006, Stephen was chair of the Julia Farr Services Inc., which is the largest disability services provider here in South Australia. Since being elected to Parliament in 2006, he's held numerous shadow portfolios, including as Shadow Minister for Disability Services. From 2011 to 13, he was chairperson of the committee that reported on access to and interaction with the justice system for people with disabilities. And in 2015, he was committee member that reviewed access to the education system for students with disabilities. So I thank you, Minister, for your ongoing, or Minister Stephen, I thank you for your ongoing interest and contribution to making the world, well, at least South Australia, a better place for people living with disabilities across a whole range of different sectors. In this regard, we are so pleased that you're able to find time in your busy schedule to be with us today and to open this conference. So please join with me to welcome the Honourable Stephen Wade.
Thanks, David, and thanks for calling me Stephen. I'm always suspicious that people who call me Minister have just forgotten my name. I'd like to acknowledge David as Chair of MND Australia Board, and Carol Burks, the CEO of MND Australia, Jeff Thomas, the Chair of MND SA Board, and Ms Karen Percival, the Chief Executive Officer of MND SA. I'd like to acknowledge people living with MND and their carers, ladies and gentlemen. I acknowledge that we meet today on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and future. It's a privilege to be able to provide the opening address at the 9th National Motor Neurone Disease Australia Conference. MND is a progressive terminal neurological disease which can strike anyone. More than 2,000 people have MND in Australia, with the majority of those being under the age of 65. Of course, for every person diagnosed with MND, it's estimated that a further 14 members of their families and friends will live with the effect of MND forever. Through the work of MND Australia and others, there is a growing national awareness of the impact of MND and a growing determination to improve care and outcomes for people with MND. This 9th National Conference is a clear demonstration of that determination. Under the broad themes of informing, influencing and innovating, the conference brings together a high-calibre panel of speakers. The conference underscores the value of and need for coordinated multidisciplinary care and value of bringing people from across disciplines together to share best practice to improve the lives of people living with MND. Each of the Australian and New Zealand jurisdictions are at different points of their journey in developing such services. So let me give you a quick snapshot of where we are on the journey in South Australia. In 2001, Dr. Peter Allcroft, the palliative care consultant, and Karen Gleitzner, palliative care nurse practitioner, were instrumental in initiating the MND clinic at the Repatriation General Hospital to provide interventions to help people living with MND to live better for longer. In its very conception, the service was multidisciplinary. This year, Ms Gleitzner was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for her services to people living with MND. Now based at the Flinders Medical Centre, the MND clinic is the only specialised multidisciplinary service within South Australia and is recognised by health practitioners across the state as a centre of excellence. It's estimated that between 80 and 90% of all South Australians who live with MND attend the clinic. Referral numbers have increased over the years. As at July 2018, there were 105 people on the clinic's books and 98 attend regularly. This comprises of people predominantly from metropolitan Adelaide, but about 25% from rural and regional South Australia, and a small number of interstate patients. The MND clinic manages the development and rapid evolution of the symptoms and offers treatment to improve the quality of life of MND patients. Consistent with the theme of this conference, it is fundamentally a multidisciplinary service supported by expertise of staff across disciplines such as neurology, palliative care, gastroenterology, the non-invasive ventilation team, psychiatry, rheumatology, nursing, speech pathology, occupational therapy and dietetics. It's important to highlight the positive links and active referral system that the MND clinic has developed with MND Association of South Australia, which provides information, education and support to the South Australian community affected by motor neurone disease. The MND Association of South Australia has recently established a presence at the FMC MND clinic, and this provides the opportunity for people with MND to have a face-to-face meeting and better access to the home visits and equipment that are offered by MND SA. This MND SA service at Flinders is particularly useful for people living in regional South Australia who have less opportunity for home visits. The clinic also actively refers people who are under 65 and eligible to receive support from the NDIS, and those 65 and older to receive support through My Aged Care. These collaborative and multidisciplinary approaches enable health workers and the MND community to share best practice and ensure that people living with MND are able to live their best lives. I commend MND Australia for encouraging the sharing of expertise and understanding of MND nationally to improve care and support for people living with MND, their families and carers. It's important that we continue to promote evidence-based and best practice care and collaboration, coordination and research through conferences such as these. I commend MND Australia for fostering that collaboration through conferences since 2005. Conferences empower the MND community to maintain collaborative relationships and knowledge sharing. This conference, I trust, will be a great opportunity to get together with people from the MND network across Australia and New Zealand and see how they're meeting the challenges and implementing the latest innovations. I encourage each of you to seize the day. Making the most of the opportunity may mean stepping outside your comfort zone and talking to people from outside your area of expertise. Each of us are beneficiaries of such collaboration, as is the sector as a whole. And speaking of stepping out, you are in Australia's most magnificent capital city. There is much to see, and it's so easy to get from A to B to see it. So I hope you might give yourself some wellbeing time and take the opportunity to enjoy our city, the hills and the regions beyond. So welcome, and I trust the conference will be all you hoped for and more. I declare the National MND Australia Conference 2018 open.
Thank you, Stephen, for your kind words, and thank you for opening the conference. I'm now going to invite Jerry Packer, our Support Services Manager from MND South Australia, who's going to chair the first session of the day. So thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Welcome, everyone. I have the distinct pleasure of actually introducing our first two guest speakers today. Now, I'm going to do it a bit differently than what we're probably used to, because I'm going to introduce them both together, but they're going to talk separately, only because we're a little bit constrained with timing. The first discussion of the day, or talk of the day, is a personal perspective from two of our MND diagnosed clients here in South Australia. So the first person I'd like to introduce is a man by the name of Nicholas Bowman. Nick, he is a 71 years old, self-funded retiree. He was actually born in London, and he grew up in southern England and attended boarding schools from the ages of 6 to 17. Upon leaving school, he went into sales, eventually starting his own business with a partner. He has 2 adult sons from his first marriage living in England, and 2 grandchildren and 3 step-grandchildren. I hope you can keep count, because there's more coming. Nicholas migrated to Australia in 2000 to be with his current partner Lisa, and he has a further 2 stepchildren and 6 grandchildren. Sorry, that's step-grandchildren, my bad. Living in Adelaide, and now he's a dual citizen. So Nicholas was diagnosed with MND in 2016 when he first noticed a weakness in his arms. So I'm also going to introduce our second speaker. His name is Greg Downton. Now, Greg's a 54-year-old man, a husband to Jean and a father to 3 adult children, Matt, Kate and Nathan. And before his life with MND, he was a groundsman in a large school, which he loved. And he took great pride in maintaining the gardens around that school. He and Jean had started to travel and were enjoying seeing a lot of Australia as well as overseas locations, and for diagnosis, life is good. So after experiencing a loss of strength in his left arm, then numerous tests and appointments, with anyone with MND can completely understand with that, Greg was diagnosed with MND on the 24th of November in 2015. So needless to say, it rocked his world and that of his family, and Greg has recently been accepted as an NDIS participant. He has had to adjust to a very different life, and his plans for an active future no longer exist. Now no longer working, he pours any energy he has into still enjoying what life he still has in front of him, with what strength that remains. This does mean limiting his activities and having others do things and other activities for him. But Greg is a true example of his inner strength and courage that so many people with MND have. So I would just firstly like to introduce Nick. Now he has come in a wheelchair today, so I apologise. Some of you might not be able to see him very clearly because we don't have a ramp to get onto stage today. But we do have a roving mic.
Hi, my name's Nick and I have motor neurone disease. The end. But it's not, is it? It's a continuation. It's us passing on our experiences, both as sufferers and for those involved in research. It's a continuation for the carers, the volunteers, for all their help, support and the raising of funds for us, our family and friends that are touched by this horrible disease. Hopefully, conferences like this will continue to spread the word and bring awareness to others. We are not numerous enough that governments and health departments will focus substantial resources towards our plight. But with continuation, we'll get there. Well, it was the winter of 2015 seemed to be the onset of my MND. I first noticed that my arms and hands were weak and unsteady. However, later that year, I complained to my GP that my arms were quite achy. I didn't push the issue, and I didn't think anything about it, as I thought that at 68, loss of steadiness was probably likely. Around 2016, January, I saw my GP again, and he gave me a referral to see a neurologist. The wait time was long, and my appointment was not until June. Due to a family disaster, I had to travel to England at the end of May. My partner suggested that I take the referral letter with me and maybe see a specialist over there, as I was going to miss the appointment here and my arms appeared to be getting weaker and less steady. That turned out to be a good move, as when I arrived it was clear that I would be in England for longer than expected. I saw a GP there and she wrote a referral to see a neurologist privately. The National Health System would have taken far too long. The neurologist I went to see was Dr. Robert Brenner, who's the head of neurology at the Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead, North London. Dr. Brenner arranged for me to have various tests, one of which was an EMG and nerve conduction studies. This was conducted by a doctor who was Australian. Not only that, but he knew my Adelaide neurologist as they trained together. It's a very small world. Well, the outcome of all this was MND. I stayed in the UK for a while longer, but I found that my view of the future had changed considerably and I needed to come home. All information was sent to the neurologist in Adelaide and I had an appointment shortly after returning. I'd already started on riluzole in the UK, but I had to have an MRI and lung function test here and blood tests in order that our health department was happy to prescribe the continuation. After all, I suppose 3 months is 3 months. For those that may not be aware, riluzole is supposed to increase our life expectancy by about 3 months. Where to now? 69 years old with a life expectancy of 2 to 3 years. Of course, the optimists will say 5. Me, I felt myself going downhill faster than I actually was. I tried keeping a record of my arm strength by pressing down on the bathroom scales. That proved to be a waste of time and effort. So I settled in to wait and see. It seemed important then that I accomplish as much as possible. Part of my English family came out to spend Christmas here, and Lisa and I drove the Great Ocean Road and spent time with family in Melbourne. Pretty much the whole of the Adelaide family, and you know how many kids there are there, hired a riverboat on the Murray for a long weekend. And then Lisa and I decided that as a last hurrah, we would go round the world before my condition made distance travel too difficult. And while I could still get travel insurance, it was a brilliant trip. In between times, the help and support from MNDSA made me aware of others in the same boat. This is a really excellent organisation, struggling not only to help and advise MND sufferers and their families, but to raise funds to keep doing their work. Whilst I'm about it, I'd like to thank all the volunteers, private and corporate donors who've made the difference between help for us and no help for us. I'm saddened, though, that the state government sees fit to not support this small team, although there's plenty in the coffers for parliamentary personal travel all over the world to see things that they could have viewed on FaceTime. Every time I want to see what my family is doing, I don't fly over, I FaceTime them and they show me. No cost, no wasted time. So what now? 26 months into my diagnosis, it seems like I'll last longer than average. Maybe things will still be reasonable this Christmas. We'll have to wait and see. Now for the humour, the frustration and the cynicism. I was assessed by ACAT a couple of months ago and was assessed as needing level 4 home care package. Fair enough, I'd agree. Help is needed and due to the nature of MND will only become more necessary as time passes. However, the health department seems to be under pressure that MND can be halted in its tracks and put on hold to a later date. 12 to 18 months wait. They've got to be kidding. Never mind, I'm told, you can get some interim help from here, there, and everywhere. It's like getting a mobile phone plan. Make it difficult, make it confusing, and people will sign up for anything or something or even just give up. The federal government loves to shout about the amount of money that's being spent on care plans, and the NDIS for that matter, knowing only too well they'll never have to find it all, as a good many of us won't be around to collect. Plenty of money then in the coffers to wine and dine and travel the world, and post tweets and the like to say, oh, look at me, who I'm hobnobbing with, awesome destination. And this brings me to one other point, and I'm nearly finished. I have it on good authority the law requires me to carry on living to the bitter end. Even though I have a terminal illness, I can only choose to end my life on my own and in secret. This is not illegal, but to have someone else with me helping me to do something legal is illegal, even if they're only there to hold my hand and say goodbye. So thanks to all the policymakers that have a vested interest in keeping me alive, I hope they're never in my position. Thank you for listening. Maybe I've embarrassed some people, maybe I've made some chuckle, but most of all I hope I've made people think that they could be us. And if I've really upset anyone, blame it on my frontal lobe. And finally, I'll leave you with this thought. If your motor neurons refuse to work their muscles, do they really deserve a trophy? Thanks.
Thanks, Nick, for coming in and talking for us. That was really good. So now I'd like to introduce Greg, and you're okay to climb up onto the podium. You'll get there. Thanks, Matt.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to get up and just speak for a few minutes. My situation is probably very similar to most MND people, where my early 2015 I started having hand weakness, which happened very quickly. Within about a week, I just noticed that my hand was exceptionally weak. And after lots of testing, all the normal neurological tests, MRIs, trip to Sydney to be tested there. It was November 2015 where I was told basically I had MND. And in January 2016, my neurologist in Adelaide said I needed to stop work because I couldn't, I was a hazard to myself and other workers in the workplace. So the situation there is, what do you do when you're told you've got MND? What do you do now? So the neurologist said, contact MND SA and they'll be able to help you along the way. And I think the problem with MND is when you're diagnosed with it, you know that it's going to finish you off pretty quick, but you just don't know how long that's going to take. So we got in touch with MND SA and Jerry came out, sat down with us for probably 2 hours. It was a pretty hard 2 hours. But at the end of it, we certainly knew what was ahead of us. And with the MND SA helping us along, it was, I don't know what we'd do without them. The issues that people face with MND, some of the things that I find is, and Jerry said it, is being frustrated. For 50 odd years, you've been able to do just even the basics of things, and suddenly your hands don't work, your legs don't work very well. So a lot of basic things are actually extremely hard to do and you get very frustrated. Tiredness and exhaustion seems to be a fairly common thing with MND as well. Just waking up tired in the morning and then being exhausted all day, you're just continually tired. I have very weak legs. I do have 2 wheelchairs at home. I didn't bring them today. I thought I'll see how I go. My left hand and arm is very weak as well, so I find it very difficult trying to do things with both hands, and my neck and shoulders get quite sore as well. I take a lot of vitamins. I was told by a naturopath to take a lot of vitamins to help me, and I've also been taking cannabis oil for over 2 years. So I'm now coming up to 3 years of having MND, and I know that it's quite slow progression in me. Whether that's the oil doing that, I'm not sure. And I try to eat organic. My wife is very hot on eating organic food, and so our food bill's gone up considerably. I've just started my second NDIS plan, and I'm extremely grateful to the government for setting up the NDIS. I know it's had a lot of teething problems, particularly with MND in South Australia, but my second plan certainly seems a lot better than what I first had. And I'm extremely grateful to that because it's been able to keep me at home, staying in my own house. If we didn't have help from the NDIS, we would have to move and get into a smaller house with a smaller garden, that sort of thing. So we get lots of help through the NDIS, and we are so appreciative of being on it. Just thank you. I want to say thank you to everybody that works with anybody with MND. Without you guys, life would be pretty difficult, and we just don't take it for granted. And I just want to encourage you to, even if you're working with people that are really hard, just stick at it, because we really do need you guys. One of my goals, if I'm asked goals, it would be to see all the associations close down, that you guys, some of you guys would lose your jobs. That would be awesome. Sorry to say that. And a mate of mine, some of you in New South Wales may know Phil Camden, and he's a good friend of ours and his wife, and he says a thing where, and I'm quoting what he says, is MND, I may have MND, but MND doesn't have me. So I still live, I still do everything I can. It doesn't control me to a point where I don't do things. So very grateful for having Phil and Lenore in our lives. And I want to thank God for helping me through all this as well. So thank you.
Don't wander away too far. So ordinarily would stand up here and would present a little gift to our speakers, but they're actually down here. So in a second, I'll actually present them with a thank you gift for coming in and talking today. Thanks, guys. But in that interim, I might also introduce our first keynote speaker for the day. So our first keynote speaker is Susan Mathers. Now, Dr. Susan Mathers is a consultant neurologist at the Monash Medical Centre and clinical director at the neurology at Calvary Health Care in Bethlehem, which is based in Melbourne, which provides neurorehabilitation and neuropalliative services to people with progressive neurological diseases, including over 200 people with motor neuron disease. She's a member of the Motor Neuron Disease Research Institute of Australia, the MND Research Tissue Bank, and a founding member of the MND National Registry. Her main interests are in the management of chronic progressive neurological diseases, and in this area she is currently involved in diseases and models of care. She has participated in a number of government-sponsored collaborative projects, and in this area she is currently involved in a project to implement statewide integrated care services for people with progressive neurological diseases in Victoria. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Susan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction and for inviting me to speak today. I don't think any of us are going to be able to express as eloquently as our previous two speakers the need for a person-centred approach to this disease. I've been asked today to talk about person-centred care and also about a project that we've been doing in Victoria to develop progressive neurological disease services across the state. And lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about a new project that's been funded by the NH and MRC that we hope will bring together all of the MND services and the whole population of people living with MND in one research collaborative. So hopefully I'll have time to talk a little bit about that. All of us, I think, or most of us in this room, will be involved in our day-to-day managing and caring for people with motor neuron disease or other similar conditions. We hope that in some way the advice that we can give or the interventions that we offer will improve people's quality of life, may improve their comfort, and give them perhaps some calmness and serenity in their lives. We hope also that all of us as providers are kind of swimming in the same direction as the person we're looking after. However, all of us will be very much aware that often that's not the case, and that under the surface there is furious activity, often turmoil, and that a lot of that effort and anxiety tends to fall back on the person with MND or on their family and carers. When our services are not well linked together and when our communication isn't good and we don't have that practice of person-centred care. So what do other people say about person-centred care? This is a report from a UK advocacy group, and I think their words are very eloquent. So people using healthcare services should be confident that they will receive clear, understandable information, be given the opportunity for them and their loved ones to take an active role in their care, and be treated in a way that recognises and respects the outcomes that matter most to them. Beautiful, simple language. It makes it seem very easy, doesn't it? And yet we know that we don't always achieve that. The World Health Organization goes a step further, and they say that beyond people-centred care, there should be the consumer should be participating in service design and education and support, and that we should be taking their views into account when we address population health and community resilience. And we'll come back to that thought later on at the end of the talk. Here in Australia, those of us who work in health services that need to be accredited against national standards know that one of the important tenets of those standards is partnering with consumers. And so Person-centred care is an important topic. It underpins all that we should be doing. The principles of person-centred care have really been around a long time, but I think they actually have stood the test of time as well, and we've chosen to use them in the projects that we're doing at the moment. They were first described by focus groups working in the 1980s at Harvard Medical School, and with modifications came to be known as the 8 Picker principles of patient-centred care. Now, for our project, we've chosen to group them differently than in the published literature, because we thought that these first 5 really described what the lived experience of good care should be. That a person should be shown respect for their own values and preferences, they should have good information, education and communication, they should expect to have their physical comfort addressed and their emotional needs as well. And there should always be involvement of family and friends. So that's what we hope would be the outcome of good care. The other ones, the other 3 principles, I think are really more about the pathways with which we deliver care and the communication. And if they're in place and working, none of us should actually be aware of them. They should just be happening. And so the problem at the moment is that a lot of these 3 lower principles are actually being driven by the patient themselves rather than by the system. We also did a literature review to see what others have thought on this subject, and I'm just going to share this one paper with you, which comes out of Ireland from their national MND service. So people, as we've heard before, want access to multidisciplinary care, and they want the care to be delivered in their community. Again, we see this need for better emotional support. They want their care to be timely, and we've heard from our 2 first speakers how they're very much aware of a need to have things when they need them and not in 18 months' time. They want the care to be coordinated, and they're very aware of this lack of specialised knowledge about these relatively uncommon diseases. And I think that's something that we all experience time and time again, that people are much more relaxed when they're dealing with people who understand their disease or who are prepared to go away and find out for them what they might need, ask others, rather than just say, I don't know anything about this disease. And back in Ireland, they're also aware that there's a lack of appropriate equipment. So we did our own survey in Victoria. We partnered up with the neurological associations to send out a survey to people living in Victoria with a progressive neurological disease. And here are some of the comments that we received back. So, flexible services and a willingness to accept my input is important to me. Very limited services in our local area. No one seems to understand my condition. A local expert in care for this disease who coordinated others would be good. I think they haven't met MND Victoria because that's exactly what they do. All service providers seem to operate independently of each other, constantly having to inform each new provider, which is very frustrating. As there's little known about the disease, it's hard to get one health carer with experience, never mind a team working together. And so, in this day and age, those are disappointing comments, aren't they? When we are a rich nation with wonderful health services, really well-funded disability services in many ways, if you compare us to other countries, yet we're really not getting our act together. So here is a summary of the results of the survey. 660 people living with a progressive neurological disease replied, which we thought was quite a good effort. About half of them identified themselves as mildly disabled, and the other half as moderately or severely disabled. About 150 of them had motor neuron disease, and the biggest group had multiple sclerosis, because it's obviously the commonest PND. But you can see again and I don't think I can laser pointer this all that readily from this angle, but you can see that the same common themes are coming out. Over 80% of people wanted their care to come from specialists, people who knew what they were talking about. They wanted providers to communicate better. They wanted the service delivered closer to where they lived, and they wanted them to be coordinated. Interestingly enough, we asked them about care over the internet because we were at the same time going to be looking at developing our telehealth services, and 50% said that that would be important. Now, we've got to remember that at the time we did this survey, which was 2013, at the beginning of our project, Medicare funding for telehealth was just about to begin. So most people wouldn't have had an opportunity to experience care over the internet, but they were already, more than half of them, interested in that concept. And what interested us most of all was that 70% of all of the people who replied wanted to participate in research. And if you looked at the people with MND, it was well over 80%. So very focused on finding a cure and learning more about the disease. But if we come down to the things that they felt were not available to them, again, 36% of people wanted more emotional support. And I think it's, as a neurologist, the thing that I'm very aware of is that people will often not say that to me because they don't think that's my job. And it's only if I ask them, how are you going, that they will actually then tell me a little bit more. But one of the advantages of having a multidisciplinary team is that the person will always find someone that they relate to well enough to have those conversations. I think multidisciplinary care can fill in a lot of the gaps. Interestingly, in Victoria, the MND population did not report such high levels of need for emotional support, suggesting that they're already getting better support than some of the other patient groups. There was a shortage of help at home with domestic duties and equipment, as you would expect. And remember that this survey was done when NDIS was just piloting in Victoria, and it will be very interesting to see what that would look like in a few years' time. So we summarised this by saying that the Victorian consumers had told us they wanted their care to be delivered locally but with specialist input. They wanted it well coordinated, they wanted it to address their physical, social and emotional needs, and they wanted it linked with research. So our project then had some aims. The government wanted us to develop Bethlehem's ability to be a statewide provider to support other services who were delivering care to this group of people. The specific aim of this part of the project was to support Barwon Health in Geelong to develop a very similar multidisciplinary clinic to ours to look after people in the Barwon and the southwest region, which comes down onto the South Australian border, and to evaluate that implementation as part of the project. So the Victorian government provided some funding for a project officer and also to the university, Monash University, to do the evaluation. And our hypothesis was that this integrated model of care is beneficial and that you can provide it equally well in a new site using this statewide collaborative supportive model. We aim to recruit about 100 people at Bethlehem and 50 people in Barwon into the study, and we did manage to do that. 2 of the people moved from Bethlehem areas to Barwon across the study. The average age was, the demographics were actually remarkably similar in the 2 groups. These were people who'd been freshly referred into these services and were recruited in their first or second visit. About 80 to 90% of people were living with another person, and most of them were deemed their carer. And about 80% of people had other medical comorbidities, so a relatively frail medical group of people that were attending the service. In Bethlehem, 2/3 of the people recruited had motor neurone disease, and just over half at Barwon, suggesting that this is a group of people who desperately do need multidisciplinary care, and also I think reflective of the fact that referral patterns for people with MND are quite well established. Certainly in Victoria, people are referred on quite quickly following diagnosis to a service like ours, and to the Motor Neuron Association, and they help to link people quite quickly with services. So we had a number of outcome measures that we gathered over the 18-month period of the follow-up, and I'm not going to talk about all of those today. We did some consumer satisfaction surveys every 6 months across the study, and they were overwhelmingly positive, and they were the same at the two sites. One of the things that we collected were some patient stories. So Marianne McPhee, our project officer, interviewed 10 patients and families at each site, so 20 in all, and those transcribed stories of their experience of care, structured around the principles of person-centred care, were analysed by Monash University, and I'll come to those results. We also used a quality of life tool. We used the SF36 and a carer burden index, and we gathered information on adverse events and serious adverse events happening across the time period. So things like death, hospitalisation, the need to move into residential care, family breakdown, those sorts of things. So if I come to the patient stories, we did what's called sentiment analysis. Now this is something that's actually used more in market research, but is increasingly used in healthcare as well. You use a computer algorithm and a machine learning approach to analyse the sentiments expressed by people during their interviews. And you can see, we were quite fascinated by the results, in fact, that they're very similar across the two sites. They're overwhelmingly positive in their sentiments rather than negative. And the three sentiments that were most commonly expressed during the interviews were thoughts of anticipation, of joy, and trust, which is, I think, quite startling, really, when you're considering the experience that you think these people must be having. And that brings me along also to when we looked at the quality of life measures. So the mental health component of the quality of life tools showed that these people were tracking pretty much along the norm. Now clearly there's a wide variation as well, standard deviation, and we all know that people have times during these illnesses where they do suffer mental health problems and emotional distress, and we're used to dealing with that when we meet people. But by and large, they are maintaining quite a good quality of life and good mental well-being across these illnesses. And I think that does come across in our own experience, that people say, how can you possibly work in this area? It must be terrible. But it's not terrible. People, I enjoy doing clinics. I enjoy people coming along. They're often, looking forward. They've got lots of things that they're planning to do. They're not giving up at all, these patients. And yet, when you look at the physical components of these scales, clearly these people are disabled. They were disabled at the start of our project, and they became more disabled across the project. And if we look at the functional rating scales for people with motor neuron disease, you can see that they showed significant decline in their function across that time. It was important that we measured carer burden because there's lots of information in the literature that motor neuron disease and these other progressive diseases cause significant burden to carers and families. And you can see that whilst the carer burden was the same at both sites, so we were managing to deliver a similar service and similar level of support with the new clinic, the levels of carer burden were relatively high. They were commensurate with what you see in the literature. So levels at some 16 to 21, 22 are seen in people caring for folks with Alzheimer's disease, with symptomatic Parkinson's disease, and with MND, with mild cognitive impairment. So our carers were in that sort of ballpark. The interesting thing, however, is that if we analysed the carer burden of the people who died during the project, and 35 people died, their carer burden were on average 9 points higher than what I'm showing you here. So that last year of life in MND really increases your carer burden, and I'm sure Samar will have something to say about that when she gives her talk later on. So 35 people died. As you would expect, almost all of those had motor neuron disease, 23 at Bethlehem and 9 at Bowman. The others had Parkinsonian syndromes. We also collected data on what we called our Navigating the System tools, and I'll just very briefly summarise those here. So by developing the new clinic, we were able to reduce travel time by 70% for people coming to clinic, and that's a very important thing. It's all very well to call yourself a statewide service and say you see everybody, but they've got to come to me. And and I think if you look at the other statewide services in Victoria, they all work on that principle. We're happy to see anybody, but you've got to come to us. And this is our attempt, I think, to try and make a more outreach type model than before. One of the things we hoped is that we would be able to provide services to more people, and we did achieve that. At the start of the project, 46 people were travelling to Bethlehem to attend our clinic from that region. By the end of the project, over 200 people had been referred to the new clinic, suggesting that if you provide services more close to home, people will come. The other thing we hoped to drive was enhanced clinical pathways in the region, and I think we did manage to do that. When we started this project, I've always been of the view that if you wait till somebody gives you a bucket of money to do your project the way you want to do it, you will never start, because no one comes along and hands you a bucket of money these days. And so we started with a very slim amount of resource. We had half a day a week of neurologist, we had 2 days of physio, OT, speech and social work, and a part-time clinic coordinator. And yet we were able to achieve comparable results in terms of outcome measures by just getting going. And over the time of the project, we were able to recruit some other resources into the service, and it has continued to evolve. And we were able to drive local clinical pathways. So by the end of the project, we had some rehab hours in clinic. We had added dietetics to clinic. They had developed a clinical pathway for getting a fast PEG insertion in the area. And the Victorian Respiratory Support Service had joined the clinic too, so people no longer had to travel up to Melbourne to discuss their respiratory needs. Palliative care had joined the clinic, and it was obviously an interface for Motor Neuron Association and the other neurological associations to meet people in the clinic. It was also a time when the NDIS was piloting in the region, and so they did a lot of work on their relationships and interface with the NDIS. So I think the project helped to drive some of that. We also looked at how much care planning and advanced care planning was going on, and those levels were high. And all of the measures really that we recorded showed no significant differences between the two sites. We wanted to also see if we could develop some red flags to help care providers and health providers to recognise patients who were at greatest risk of having adverse events. And the outcome of the study showed that people with a diagnosis of motor neuron disease and people who had rapid disease progression, one and the same really, were more at risk of things going wrong in their lives, as you would expect. People with comorbidities, and I said at the beginning, many of these patients did have a lot of comorbidities. Early chest infections, swallowing problems, difficulty feeding yourself, and difficulty transferring, all related to an increased risk of bad things happening in the future, and should be triggering us to address these issues early. So what did we want to take forward from the project? Well, we wanted to go on and develop other sites, and we have another site at Bundoora Extended Care that's run by Northern Health that's developing an MND service into a PND service now. And we've got plans, hopefully, for a service in the east of the state. We need to keep on trying to drive this breaking down of barriers between services, between health and disability services, so that we work together better. But I want to just focus a little bit on tailoring the service to the person, because that's what we started talking about, person-centred care. Because whilst our outcome measures all look pretty rosy and pretty good, that we were able to achieve what we set out, they're obviously a wide standard deviation from the norm. And so there are always going to be people who don't engage with research and don't go into studies like this, don't engage with us as service providers, and fall through the cracks. And we need to focus on, how can we be more flexible in our service delivery so that everyone is included in this. And that's going to be a focus for us into the future. And we need to also improve everyone's access to research activities living in Australia, because at the moment, clearly, we're not including some of the states and territories in the work that's currently going on. So I want to just turn in the last few minutes to the second part of my talk, and I want to start by asking an obvious question. Why have we not found a cure for MND? And the somewhat obvious answer is, I suppose, that it's complicated. It was in 2013 that Amar Al-Shalabi and Orla Hardiman published their gene time environment model of the cause of motor neuron disease. So we're all born with our genetic load that we inherit from our patients. Some people are born with a particular gene that's going to cause motor neuron disease at some time during their life. The rest of us are probably born with genetic combinations that predispose us to certain illnesses, and for some that illness is MND. Over time, our cells and our DNA gets damaged and modified. That's why we age, that's why we go grey. And we're exposed to lots of environmental potential triggers for disease. And at some point, the disease starts and then relentlessly progresses until death. There's lots of things we still need to learn. We don't have all the genes that cause motor neuron disease, and we certainly don't fully understand all the gene interactions that predispose people to motor neuron disease. We don't know the environmental triggers, and we don't know why the disease starts in a certain part of the body in different people and progresses at different rates in different people. And we don't know how to cure the disease. So there's lots of scope for research. Maybe what we need is not just person-centred care, but we need person-centred research because of this variability in the disease. And this is a concept and an approach that's been picked up in many diseases, particularly in oncology and the treatment of cancer, that we need a more precision medicine approach that takes into account individual variability in genes, environment and lifestyle. Now, Australia's not behind the door in this area. We, over recent years and decade or two, a lot of platform research and good scientific research has been going on, and we're now also, as you can tell, much more involved in clinical trials than we used to be. And just a few of those things. Sho is going to talk later, I'm sure, a bit more about the need to collect a lot of data on a lot of patients if we're going to have a better understanding of the disease. And that'll be genetics, it'll be about proteins in cells, it'll be about patients' metabolism. And this is a way that we hope to be able to more accurately subgroup patients so that we can pick treatments that might work in some groups of patients but not in others, and target the treatments that we give people in the future. There is an approach to this already happening in Melbourne at the Florey Institute. Fight MND and the Victorian Government have funded this, and I'll just give you a quick overview. So patients came along to our clinics and donated skin biopsies, and then those biopsies, the fibroblasts were changed into pluripotent stem cells, and they were grown up in dishes to evolve into motor neuron disease. Now that meant that you had motor neuron disease in a dish, essentially, to study. And rather than using an animal model like a mouse, you can test the patient's own motor neurons. And it's not just MND in a dish, it's that person's MND in a dish, that person's particular type of MND. And the state government funded this robotic high-throughput drug screening equipment, which hopes to challenge that person's motor neurons with tens of thousands of drugs from libraries that are already well established, in the hope that you can spit out at the end of it a drug or drug combinations that will work in that particular individual. So very much a person-centred research approach. We do have already 3 years' worth of the Ice Bucket Challenge grant that's been collecting genetic data and clinical data through SALSA, which is run by Naomi Ray in Queensland. And Naomi and her group have received funding from the Thomas family here in South Australia to develop a patient and carer app. And we hope that by using the NH and MRC partnership grant, that we will be able to incorporate that into data collection and data linkage and give people with MND and their carers direct input so that you don't have to come always to clinic to have input into research, but also access to information. And they've already started to combine all of that data with the Australian database that's been running since 2004. So there are lots of people involved in this effort of improving our understanding of the disease by collecting a much more population-based set of data that will allow us to link to much bigger groups in other countries as well. But this NH and MRC partnership grant is not just about data collection, it's about informing government policy. And so by having stronger consumer input to research design, to service design, and a large group of data that we can analyse, we hope that we'll be able to inform government policy and perhaps make some of these changes that our participants were talking about earlier on, where they feel that government isn't listening. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, very much. I was particularly interested in a couple of the points that you made there, especially about what the patients wanted, about access to multidisciplinary care and emotional support and that coordinated approach. It does kind of ring close to home with some of that stuff. And the high importance of specialist care, which I think I know it was about 86%, which is amazing. And I know there's something that rings very true to form for us in South Australia was about the measuring the carer burden. So I know that's been quite a big thing for us. Just looking at our chairman down here. And so obviously moving forward with the education and person-centred care, which I think, most of us in this room is probably health professional or research-based, so I think we can very much understand that. So we have probably time for one, maybe two maximum questions. So do we have any questions? There should be a roving mic. I mean, I've got one right here. Yep. Peter,
hello, I'm Eric Kelly from MND Victoria. Very interesting research around the multidisciplinary clinics and about the people who attended the clinics and why they attend and what they get out of it, which is really positive. But I just wondered if there's any research around those who don't attend the clinics and why that's the case and how we address those issues.
And I think that's what I'm saying about tailoring services to the individual, that we tend to forget about the people that can't hear. We don't know about them. We don't know how many there are in many ways as well. Certainly, the literature says that people who attend multidisciplinary MND clinics tend to live longer, and sometimes up to a year longer. And I would imagine that's because they get access to the interventions at the right time, when they can actually make a difference to their lives and survival. So it is probably important that we maximise the access to that way of thinking. Now, at the moment, I think the best alternative we have to attending clinics or developing clinics that are closer to where people live, and there's a limit to how many of those you can obviously run and afford, is telehealth. And I'm a strong advocate and proponent of telehealth. It's got its teething problems. The NBN needs to step up and roll out faster and work better. And obviously hospitals like our own have firewalls that impede some of our easy access to people. But I think it's a lot better than nothing, which is what we have if a person can't come to clinic. So we're doing increasing amounts of telehealth to the home, to the GP's practice. And I think it has an additional benefit, because often you guys come along to those sessions that you might be at the GP's or in the patient's home. The palliative care service may be there. Sometimes the GP comes themselves, and we always encourage to have a health professional there when we link in, because we're going to get to talk to them directly, and they get to know us as well. So they're much more likely to communicate to and fro, which doesn't tend to happen so much. We send letters, but we never hear anything back from the other health professionals. So I think it does help to build that external, wider team work around that person. And it's also an opportunity for team learning there, so that we learn what's going on locally, they learn from us the sorts of things that we might do. It's quite informal, and I'm not sure, that is something that we are doing as a project, and we want to try and evaluate how best to use telehealth.
I think it's a bit more than people not being able to get there for whatever reasons. I think it's some people don't want to go.
Yeah.
And that's a real issue as well, and we know that they'll get better support and have a longer, better quality of life if they do go to a multidisciplinary clinic. But how do we get those people to go who don't want to go, and why aren't they not wanting to go?
That's right, and we probably don't know all the reasons for that. I mean, I think even of the people who do come to clinic, we're very aware of how stressful that is for them. I mean, they will say to you, they'll say to me that they appreciate very much what we're offering and what we're doing, and they quite like meeting up with us and catching up with us. But it's quite a thought, as it ticks round to their time to come back, because they're going to come back and they're going to be confronted by the fact that they're a bit worse and they've got something else to talk about, and we might have one of those very difficult conversations one day. So, I mean, I think people have to gird their loins to come to clinic, and they're brave to come to clinic, and most of them come because they think it's probably going to be better than not coming. But yeah, you're right, there are people who come once and never come again, and there are people who just never come at all. And we don't then have the opportunity to educate them as to why that might be a good thing. And that's where you guys come in too, is that you can go out there into the home and be advocates for all sorts of service providers that we can never do unless we can get a foot in the door. But it is about health literacy, isn't it, in the end of the day? And that's what, if we're talking about government policy, 60% of Australians have poor health literacy across the board. And so if you're stuck with an uncommon, complex disease, what's your health literacy understanding going to be about how you go ahead to manage that situation? It's not going to be that good, I suspect. And if you completely close off to any input, well, it's a challenge. So I think we need to educate the whole community about chronic disease and chronic disease management, and we need a better model for all of chronic disease management. So they're the kind of things I hope that our project might be able to have something to say about in the end of the day.
Okay, I think we've got one question waiting, and that's it, sorry.
Susan Petercroft from South Australia. With the development of statewide services, is there a minimum number that you're able to look at? We're a quarter of the size of Victoria, and all of our major regional centres, Mount Gambier is our biggest satellite city. So is there a minimum number of patients and expertise locally that you need to start that going?
I don't know. I mean, I think the smaller clinics run really well. I'd love to work in a small clinic. we've actually, you said we had 200 people with MND attending our clinic. We've actually got 350. This disease is growing. There's more and more people with motor neuron disease around.
Would you like a nice country location? Talk to us that.
It's just my husband's coming over this evening. We'll see what he thinks. but yeah, I think there's a lot of MND services that run with relatively small numbers of people. And I think if you had one centre that can have all this sort of super specialised stuff like the assistive communication technology expertise that can then inform and support a smaller clinic at Mount Gambier, not every site has to have everything. That was the model we tried to build, start with what you can. If someone needs neuropsychological evaluation and behaviour management input, then they can, Bethlehem perhaps provides that at least for the time being until you've got that established. So that's the model that we've been working off.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much, Susan. On behalf of MND Australia and all of us here, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we've got our next speaker, her name is Sarah Solomon. So Sarah is an OT who works, coincidentally, in the same project. So she works at the Statewide Progressive Neurological Disease Service, or the SPNDS, which you would have seen up on the presentation just then. Also at Calvary Care Bethlehem in Melbourne. That project is recognised for providing specialist care to people with MND. Services provided include neurological, palliative consultancy, symptom management, neuropalliative rehabilitation and end-of-life care. And Sarah's title for her discussion today is OT and MND, Adjusting and Adapting to Rapidly Changing Function. So without further ado, I'll introduce Sarah. Thank you.
Red one? Hey, there we go. Thanks everyone for having me. I think what I want to tell you today is, as an OT, I'm not going to give anyone a clinical pathway to follow. What I want to have your take-home message is that you've got to work with the person. As OTs, we're all about function, life, living, doing what people want to do. And that looks very different for every individual. So the reason I'm up here is I've been working at the MND clinic for 12 years. Again, had that same discussion with, I love it. I love it. Just to add to this, 5 years after working at the MND clinic, my mum was diagnosed with MND. So I'm not going to talk about our journey. It was our journey. But I just wanted you to know that as a therapist who has a very strong interest in working with people with MND, I also have cared for someone who lived and then died of MND. So she was in WA, so in a different state to where I worked, but I've been there. So I think it's just really letting you know that I know. So MND is an umbrella term. As we know, I'm not going to go through this, everybody knows what it is, but what I want for the therapists in the room to take home is that sound understanding of the MND phenotypes assists us in making appropriate choices for that person. We spend a lot of time wanting to know from the neurologists what's their lung function like, and we use that information to make good decisions with our clients, because not everyone presents the same. We know that. We know that things are important to different people. So it's about guiding and assisting our clients to make decisions that are right for them and their life. I'm not going to tell you what we do. We're going to go past that. I call this tips for OT practice, but I think for all therapists it can be really a broad sort of tips for just general practice. Understanding the phenotype and then the likely progression for the individual. Be proactive. We are planning ahead for the next stage and the long term. Now, as Greg said though, I often call my clinic appointments, I just want you to know what's out there. I'm going to dance the dance with you, because people are ready to listen at different times. They're ready to talk about things at different times, and we have to dance the dance with our clients, because we can't just do a script, because it's not going to work. We need to engage with our clients to work out what is important to them. We also need smart and strategic use of funding, and the girls from Beck will talk more about the NDIS. There is no magic rule. We're very lucky in Victoria with our MNDA equipment loan pool that I think it makes our lives incredibly easy, but there are always things that we need to be very smart and very strategic about. And that sometimes close to perfect solutions may need to be good enough. And I think this is particularly relevant to things like big home modifications, and I'll talk about that later. We often have to advocate to the agencies that are going in to help our clients that the bathroom with the wedge ramp and the insert that can be removed at a later stage is okay, and try and get around that. Be creative and not prescriptive, and put everything in writing. People come to clinic, and I think part of the project that Susan talked about was developing a shared care plan, and that I think has been really useful for us as therapists as well as the clients, because we are writing things down in their language, and also who's going to do it, because they get an incredible amount of information at clinic, and it's very hard for clients to take that away. And that people with MND require regular long-term input. Sometimes, especially in my first sessions with people, I'll say to them, I just want you to know the clinic and me is here for the long run. You can engage with me as much or as little as you like, but just to let you know I'm always there. And you can email me and you can phone me, and that's okay when you're ready. Challenges for us. Well, I think this is the same for everyone. We are dealing with often a rapidly progressing disease, especially in terms of assistive technology. Things can change quickly. We're often playing catch up. But for the person, that there's often limited time to accept the change before the next change happens. And just working with the person to work out what the best solution to manage those changes are. And the individual reactions to diagnosis that we've heard can change. They change it. And it's about working with the person to work out where they are in their reaction and how they want to approach their life. And that psychological adjustment for neuropalliative diagnosis for the individual and their others. I spend quite a lot of time helping clinicians out in the community and saying to them, it's okay if someone said no to something that you know that they might need. Just let them have time to come around to it. People with MND don't know what they need, because this is a new life for them. So I often talk about, I want you to come to the OT session in the clinic and I'm going to show you things. I'm just going to show you things. And sometimes you might see something that you think is useful for you. But I just want you to know that these things are available for you when they're required, because I want people to go away from clinic knowing that I can help them when they need it. I'm going to talk a few little things. Splints, something that I make, and it's incredible sometimes how a little splint can make a big difference to someone's function, whether it be to do function or to use it for resting. We talk a lot about upper limb supports, and I think Greg talked about shoulder pain, and I know there's another talk later on about shoulder pain, but we are finding that very good early positioning, and even if someone can walk, having good supportive seating is helping just life. It also helps to support respiratory function. Technology. Everybody wants to talk about technology. And it's a really, really amazing change in how the world has moved. And people are expecting more from their technology. They're expecting to be able to engage. The thing that I say about technology is, like anything else, good assessment is vital, because there is no magic single solution. People will come to me and say, I need an eye gaze computer. Okay, let's just take a step back, work out what your goals are. What do you want to do? An eye gaze camera is really just replacing a mouse. That's what it is. So what do they want to do? How are you going to do it? Because if you can't access the device, you can't do anything. So working out what the best access is. Eye gaze is one method of access, but there are other methods that may actually be more efficient and less fatiguing than learning eye gaze. Design a solution that will grow with the person as their condition if it changes. And what combination of hardware and software is required to meet their goals? Where do they want to use it? Eye gaze requires very good positioning for calibration. You can't just usually sit it on a table if someone's lying flat in bed. It needs to be up above them. So working out what they want to do, how they're going to do it, and where they're going to do it is really, really important. The other thing is it needs a lot of practice. I say this to my clients. I'm happy to go down this journey with you. I will foster this, but you have to be okay with practicing. And I use the analogy often about driving a car. You don't get into a car and drive on the speedway. You get into a car and you learn where everything is, and it becomes more efficient and more effective as you practice. Learning alternate ways of controlling a computer is very similar to that. Oh my God. So I'll just show you some photos of all the different variations of people's computer access and where they're using it. There you go. Equipment provision. Huge variety of aids and equipment available. As we all know, same thing. What does the person want to do? Where are they using it? How do they want to use it? Who's going to help them? And using our knowledge of onset patterns and phenotypes to predict a patient's requirement to allow for proactive introduction of any sort of equipment. And some equipment may be only useful for a short time, and that's okay. And that's where we love MND Victoria's library. Thank you, Kathy. And David. Beds. Now, the reason I talk about beds is I'm part of an OT and sexuality special interest group, which is an adjacent role to, and I think beds are that one thing that people sometimes struggle with. We know the respiratory physician will say they really need to sit up in bed. They need a hospital bed. You need a hospital bed. People think hospital beds and they go, oh, and it's about considering that person. Consider companion beds. Consider the impact of the change of intimacy and sexuality for the person. And that sometimes all the time, it needs to be discussed with care and sensitivity and education about you can put two beds together. This one may move, this one won't. Put your big doona over the top of it. From the outside, it kind of looks the same still. So we do talk a lot about sex and intimacy. Personal alarms. Now, often I will talk about personal alarms, not so much for the person, but for their significant others. Things as simple as a remote call bell that someone can press if they can't talk or they're on the NIV, that their significant other in another room of the house will not have to keep running in and out. You know, they know that their person can contact them if they need. And it does just decrease that overall sort of alertness that people have. Things like switch-adapted personal alarms, monitored, unmonitored. The NBN is causing all sorts of troubles with our personal alarm systems, but we'll get through that. Home modifications. Now, base home modifications on individual situations, and just consider the impact of a permanent home modification on someone with a rapidly progressing life-limiting condition. Permanent home mods can be very confronting because it's really affirming the diagnosis. It can be really inappropriate due to timing, disruption, cost, and then psychologically difficult because that bathroom or that ramp is going to be there after the person passes away. I've had a client actually sell the house because they couldn't stand to walk into the bathroom anymore. And I think that's something for therapists to take into consideration, and that just because someone's got a condition that is going to cause significant disability, maybe look at slightly less invasive options. So things like rubber ramps made out of recycled tractor tyres, good for the environment, cheap, removable. Does take a bit of advocacy for the carers coming in from the agencies because, you know, it's not a full bathroom modification. But really flexible, can do some really good. Just, for example, the guy with the commode with the feet hanging out, his carers hated that because it was hanging out and there was water on the floor. And in the end, the wife just went, oh, for goodness sake, I will just mop it up afterwards. It's fine. And for them, that was what they needed. You can see there's all sorts of different options that we do, but these are all totally removable options. Then you get into the really wild and crazy options, which sometimes people require. Same with ramps. Wheelchair accessible vehicles. Really, I think over the years, the cost of a wheelchair accessible vehicle has come down. The NDIS is struggling with funding of that, but really to consider what their prognosis is and who's going to drive it and where they want to go. Energy conservation, we've already talked about fatigue, very important, and the reason that some equipment may be needed is not because someone can't walk or can't do anything, but sitting down needs less energy to do the task than standing up. There we go, things we like. We like all sorts of groovy things in OT. Slightly odd things that we've made up. Cushions, buttons, switches. And what we really like is working with our team. We work with Susan, with the nurses, with our allied health colleagues to achieve unique and well-timed solutions for people. There you go. Thank you.
So we've run short on time, so we're not actually going to have questions at the moment, but please do find Sarah throughout the day, so you can ask your questions to her. That's wonderful. Just a quick couple of things, like engaging people, doing, as you put it, dance the dance. That was really good. So, you know, nothing's ever standard with MND or with anyone, humans or simple. So, you know, sometimes that close as possible fit is the way to go. So, yeah, definitely. Something that's imperative that I noted as well is that the service has to be, and this isn't just occupational therapy, this is all service provision for MND, is flexible and responsive services. This has to be imperative for a rapidly progressive disease. And one point of advice is to write it down for other specialist providers to actually be able to, you know, access. So brilliant. So, we are now going to adjourn for morning tea. You're probably all thinking, oh, thank goodness for that. Morning tea you'll find just outside the room, but a quick couple of points before everyone starts exiting. On the other side of the corridor there's a room with all the posters in it. Please do peruse and have a look, have a good read. This is a good opportunity to do that now during this break. Also, we're going to adjourn back in here at 10 to 11. That's when the break actually finishes. And can I also ask before you all leave the speakers for the next session, can you make your way to the front to have a chat with the next chair? That'd be great. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.